Your life does not change when your circumstances change. Your life changes when the voice inside your mind changes. For years, I thought I needed more motivation, more time, more confidence, and more luck. But what I really needed was to stop letting my old thoughts make decisions for my future self. This is not an audiobook about becoming perfect. This is about learning how to master your mindset before your mindset quietly masters you. Because for a long time, my own mind was the thing holding me back. Not my background, not my lack of talent, not even my circumstances, my mind, the way I thought, the way I reacted, the way I doubted myself before I even started. And maybe you know this feeling too. You want more from life. You know you're capable of more. But somehow, you keep getting trapped in the same mental patterns. Overthinking, procrastinating, starting strong and quitting early, comparing yourself to everyone else, watching motivational videos late at night, then waking up the next morning feeling exactly the same. That was my life for years. I consumed endless mindset motivation. Books, podcasts, self-improvement audiobooks, videos about discipline, success mindset, focus, and personal growth. And for a few hours, I would feel inspired, like this time things would finally change. But eventually, I always returned to the same version of myself, the same fears, the same excuses, the same habits. That's when I realized something painful. The hardest part was not changing my life. It was changing the mind that kept rebuilding the old one, because no matter how ambitious I became, my mindset quietly pulled me back toward what felt familiar. Familiar doubt, familiar fear, familiar inconsistency. And the dangerous part is, these patterns become invisible after a while. You stop questioning them. You start calling them personality. I'm just an overthinker. I'm just not disciplined. I always lose motivation. This is just who I am. I used to say those things constantly, not realizing I was rehearsing limitations until they became identity. That's how self-sabotage quietly takes control. Not through one dramatic moment, through repeated thoughts that slowly shape behavior. And behavior shapes life. I did not realize this at the time, but my brain was learning from everything I repeatedly practiced. Every excuse, every fearful thought, every delayed decision, every moment I abandoned myself, I was teaching myself a mindset of hesitation. A mindset of avoidance. A mindset that expected failure before effort even began. And eventually that mindset became emotionally exhausting. Because there's nothing more draining than fighting yourself every day, wanting success while constantly thinking like someone who expects disappointment. That internal conflict destroys focus, destroys confidence, destroys momentum. I know because I lived inside it for years. I would dream about becoming disciplined while emotionally identifying with inconsistency. I would imagine success while secretly doubting my ability to sustain effort. I wanted mindset transformation, but I was still obeying the mental patterns that created my old life. And this is where everything slowly started changing. Not when I discovered some magical success habits. Not when I became perfectly motivated. But when I finally understood this. Your brain believes what you repeatedly tell it, and your life follows what your mind repeatedly practices. That realization changed the entire direction of my personal development journey. Because suddenly, success was no longer about becoming someone completely different overnight. It became about retraining the way I think, the way I respond, the way I speak to myself, and the way I act when emotions become difficult. Quietly, one thought at a time, one habit at a time, one decision at a time. And honestly, the first thing I had to confront was uncomfortable. I had spent years believing every thought that entered my mind, every fear, every doubt, every insecure prediction. If my mind said you're probably going to fail, I believed it. If my mind said you're already behind, I obeyed it emotionally. If my mind said you're not disciplined enough, I carried that identity everywhere. But thoughts are not always truth. Sometimes they are conditioning. Sometimes they are fear repeating itself. Sometimes they are old emotional patterns trying to keep your life familiar. That was the first time I understood something powerful. You can observe your thoughts without obeying them. That changes everything, because the moment you stop treating every negative thought like a command, you begin taking your power back, slowly. And maybe that's where your growth mindset truly begins too. Not when life becomes easier, but when you stop allowing fear, doubt, and old conditioning to lead your decisions automatically. That realization became the beginning of everything for me, because noticing my thoughts was only the beginning. The harder truth was realizing how many of them were never really mine. Chapter 1. The mindset that was quietly controlling me. For most of my life, I thought my problems were external. Not enough time, not enough discipline, not enough confidence. I thought success belonged to people who were naturally focused, naturally motivated, naturally mentally strong. Meanwhile, I felt trapped inside my own head, always thinking, rarely acting. I could spend hours imagining a better future, then somehow avoid the very actions that could create it. And honestly, that disconnect slowly started destroying my confidence, because deep down, I knew I was capable of more. That's what made it painful. If I truly believed I had no potential, maybe it would have hurt less, but I could feel the gap between who I was and who I knew I could become. That gap haunted me, especially at night. At night, I became reflective, ambitious, hopeful. I would think about all the things I wanted to change, my habits, my focus, my future. I would promise myself, tomorrow will be different. Tomorrow I'll wake up early. Tomorrow I'll stop procrastinating. Tomorrow I'll finally become disciplined. But morning always exposed the truth. The same thoughts returned, the same distractions, the same hesitation, the same mental patterns quietly controlling my behavior again. That's what I didn't realize at the time. My life was not only being shaped by my actions, it was being shaped by the mindset underneath my actions. The invisible internal dialogue I repeated every day. Thoughts like, you always quit, you're already behind, you're not consistent enough. What if you fail again? Those thoughts became automatic. And because they were automatic, I stopped questioning them. That's how limiting beliefs become dangerous. Not because they scream loudly, because they repeat quietly until they sound like truth. I lived like that for years, overthinking everything, second-guessing myself constantly, watching other people succeed while secretly wondering why I couldn't seem to change consistently. And eventually, I started identifying with struggle itself. I became the person who has potential but never follows through. That identity shaped everything, because once your mind accepts an identity, your behavior starts protecting it. That was the first time I truly understood how powerful mindset transformation really is. Your brain is always searching for evidence to support the story you believe about yourself. If you believe, I'm not disciplined, your mind notices every failure. If you believe, I always procrastinate, your brain reinforces the pattern emotionally, and without realizing it, you start living inside mental loops. That was my reality. Not because I lacked ambition, because my mindset was quietly controlling my decisions before action even began. And maybe you know this feeling too. You want success, you want focus, you want personal growth. But your own thoughts keep interrupting your momentum. You begin something new. Then your mind immediately says, what's the point? You make progress, then suddenly feel the urge to sabotage it. You try to build discipline, but old emotional patterns pull you backward again. That's exhausting, especially when nobody else can see the internal battle happening inside you. But one moment changed the way I viewed my mind forever. I remember sitting alone after another unproductive day, feeling frustrated with myself again. And suddenly, a strange thought entered my mind. What if every thought I have is not automatically true? That question sounds simple, but it changed everything. Because for years, I treated every thought like a fact. Every fear became prophecy. Every insecurity became identity. Every negative prediction became emotional reality before life even had a chance to unfold. But thoughts are often habits too. That realization shocked me, because if thoughts can become habits, they can also be retrained. Slowly, repeatedly, intentionally. That was the first time I truly believed I could rewire my brain for success. Not through fake positivity, not through pretending difficult emotions do not exist, but through awareness. By noticing the thoughts that were quietly shaping my behavior every single day, that became my first habit. Noticing, not immediately reacting, not immediately believing, just observing. When fear appeared, I noticed it. When self-doubt appeared, I noticed it. When my mind predicted failure, I noticed it. And strangely enough, that small pause created space between me and the thought. And space changes everything. Because when you stop reacting automatically, you begin reclaiming control over your mindset. That's where self-development truly begins, not when life becomes easier, when awareness becomes stronger than autopilot. I did not realize it yet, but noticing my thoughts was only the beginning. The harder truth was realizing how many of my fears were simply familiar patterns pretending to protect me. Chapter 2. Why your brain chooses familiar pain. I used to think self-sabotage meant I didn't want success badly enough. That's what I told myself every time I procrastinated something important. Every time I quit too early, every time I returned to habits that were clearly making my life worse, I thought if I truly wanted a better life, I would just change. But the real problem was deeper, because eventually I noticed something uncomfortable. Even when opportunities appeared, part of me still resisted change. Not consciously, emotionally, that confused me for a long time. Why would someone who wants growth keep returning to behaviors that create frustration? Why would someone who wants confidence continue feeding insecurity? Why would someone who dreams about success repeatedly choose comfort over progress? And one day, I finally understood something powerful about the human mind. Your brain does not always choose what is best for you. It often chooses what feels familiar. Even if that familiarity hurts you, that realization explained so much of my life because suddenly my patterns made sense. The overthinking, the hesitation, the procrastination, the constant restarting. My brain was not trying to destroy me. It was trying to protect me from uncertainty. That's what I didn't realize at the time. Familiar pain feels safer to the mind than unfamiliar growth. Read that again slowly. Familiar pain feels safer than unfamiliar growth. That changes the way you see yourself. Because now your inconsistency is not proof that you are lazy or incapable. Sometimes it is simply proof that your mind is trying to keep life emotionally predictable, even when predictable means painful. I saw this clearly in my own life. I wanted confidence, but insecurity felt familiar. I wanted discipline, but distraction felt emotionally comfortable. I wanted personal growth, but staying the same protected me from failure, judgment, and uncertainty. That's why mindset transformation feels uncomfortable at first. Because growth challenges emotional familiarity, and the mind resists unfamiliar identity before it accepts it. I remember one specific moment where this became painfully obvious. I had finally started building better habits, waking up earlier, focusing more, protecting my attention, actually following through. And instead of feeling fully excited, I felt strange, restless, almost uncomfortable. Part of me wanted to return to old behaviors immediately. At first, I thought something was wrong with me. But eventually, I realized my nervous system was reacting to unfamiliar change. Chaos had become emotionally normal. Peace felt unfamiliar. That realization changed my entire approach to personal development because I stopped expecting growth to feel comfortable immediately. Sometimes growth feels awkward before it feels empowering. Sometimes discipline feels unnatural before it becomes identity. Sometimes your future self feels emotionally unfamiliar before your brain accepts them as real. That understanding gave me patience with myself for the first time. Instead of asking, why am I still struggling? I started asking, what feels emotionally familiar here? That question became life-changing because suddenly I could see my patterns clearly. I noticed how often I returned to distraction when life became uncertain. I noticed how often I delayed action when success became possible. I noticed how fear disguised itself as logic. That's the dangerous part. Fear rarely announces itself honestly. It sounds reasonable. Wait until you're more prepared. Maybe now isn't the right time. What if you embarrass yourself? What if you fail again? Those thoughts sound protective. But often, they are simply familiar fear, trying to keep your life emotionally predictable. That was the first time I truly understood why so many people stay stuck, not because they lack ambition, because their old mindset keeps pulling them back toward emotional familiarity. And maybe you felt this too. You say you want change, but part of you still clings to old habits emotionally. You dream about a different future, but your mind keeps rebuilding the same routines. That internal conflict is exhausting. But awareness changes everything, because once you recognize fear patterns, you stop automatically obeying them. That became one of the most important habits in my mindset transformation journey. Every time fear appeared, I asked myself one question: is this thought protecting me or limiting me? That question slowed everything down, because for the first time, I stopped treating fear like wisdom automatically. Sometimes fear was useful. But often, it was simply old conditioning trying to keep me emotionally safe. And emotional safety is dangerous when it keeps you disconnected from your potential. That realization shifted my entire success mindset. I stopped asking, how do I avoid discomfort? I started asking, what discomfort is necessary for growth? That question changes people, because growth always requires emotional stretching. New habits feel uncomfortable. New standards feel uncomfortable. New identity feels uncomfortable, but discomfort is not always danger. Sometimes discomfort is evidence that your mindset is finally changing. I did not fully understand this yet, but the biggest thing keeping me stuck was not my habits alone. It was the identity I kept repeating inside my own mind every single day. Chapter 3. The identity loop that keeps you stuck. For a long time, I thought my habits were the problem. I thought if I could just become more disciplined, more focused, more motivated, my life would finally change. But eventually, I realized something deeper was controlling everything. Identity, the way I saw myself, the story I repeated internally every single day. Because whether people realize it or not, most behavior follows identity, not desire, not goals identity. That realization explained why I kept sabotaging progress. Every time I tried building a better life, my old identity quietly pulled me backward. I would say I wanted success, but internally I still identified as someone inconsistent. I wanted focus, but mentally I still saw myself as distracted. I wanted confidence, but emotionally I still believed I was the kind of person who eventually quits. That internal contradiction creates suffering, because your actions can only grow consistently beyond your identity for so long before your mind tries to restore familiarity again. That was happening to me constantly. I would have a productive week, then suddenly collapse into old habits again. At first, I thought it meant I lacked discipline. But the real problem was deeper. My behavior was fighting against my self-image, and self-image usually wins. That's why people repeat destructive cycles even when they genuinely want change, because identity acts like an invisible ceiling. You rise temporarily, then emotionally return to the version of yourself you secretly believe you are. I did that for years, and the dangerous part is I reinforced those identities through language constantly. I'm just bad at consistency. I've always struggled with discipline. I'm not naturally confident. I overthink everything. Those sentences felt harmless, but repetition gives thoughts power, and eventually those thoughts stopped sounding temporary. They started sounding like truth. That's how limiting identities become permanent. Quietly, repeated internally until the mind accepts them as fact. I did not realize this at the time, but every I am statement was shaping my future behavior because the brain wants consistency between identity and action. If you believe I am lazy, your mind protects that identity. If you believe I always fail, your brain notices evidence supporting failure. That's why mindset transformation requires identity transformation too. Not fake confidence, not pretending to be perfect. Changing the internal story you repeatedly rehearse. That realization changed everything for me, because instead of obsessing over outcomes, I started paying attention to identity. Not what do I want to achieve, but who am I becoming through my repeat behavior? That question felt uncomfortable at first, because honestly, I had spent years reinforcing an identity built around struggle. Struggle became familiar, self-doubt became familiar, even inconsistency became familiar, and maybe you know this feeling too. You want personal growth, but part of you still emotionally identifies with your old limitations. You still introduce yourself internally through your weaknesses, still define yourself through past failures, still carry outdated versions of yourself into new opportunities. That mindset quietly shapes everything. I remember one morning where this became painfully obvious. I had built several positive habits already. My focus had improved. My discipline was improving. I was making progress. But after one difficult day, my mind immediately returned to old language. See, this is who you really are. That thought hit me hard, because I realized my identity had not fully changed yet. My habits were improving, but my self-image was still attached to the old version of me. That was the first time I understood something powerful. You cannot permanently create a new life while emotionally rehearsing an old identity. That realization became one of the biggest breakthroughs in my self-development journey. So I started changing my language carefully, not with fake affirmations, not pretending I was already perfect, but by creating identity statements rooted in growth instead of limitation. Instead of, I'm not disciplined, I began saying, I'm becoming someone who keeps promises to myself. Instead of, I always procrastinate, I said, I'm learning how to act before fear takes over. Instead of, I'm a failure, I said, I'm someone learning consistency through repetition. That shift sounds small, but identity shifts always begin quietly, because your brain listens to the words you repeat most often. Eventually, those new identity statements started changing my behavior naturally, not overnight. But gradually, I began showing up differently because I stopped introducing myself internally through failure. That's the hidden power of a growth mindset. A growth mindset does not deny struggle. It simply refuses to turn struggle into permanent identity. That distinction changes everything, because once identity becomes flexible, growth becomes possible again. And honestly, that mindset shift brought me emotional relief. For years, I carried old versions of myself everywhere. Old mistakes, old failures, old insecurities, but slowly I started realizing something beautiful. You're not required to keep being who you used to be. That thought freed me, because suddenly my past no longer had to control my future identity. I could evolve intentionally, quietly, one repeated behavior at a time. And that's when I became obsessed with one question. If identity is built through repetition, what happens when you intentionally repeat better thoughts, better actions, and better emotional patterns long enough? That question led me to the next breakthrough that changed my life completely. The realization that your brain is always learning from what you repeatedly practice. Chapter 4. Rewire your brain through repetition. I used to believe change happened through realization, one powerful insight, one emotional breakthrough. One moment where everything suddenly clicks, but eventually I noticed something frustrating. I had already realized many things. I knew procrastination was hurting me. I knew negative thinking was draining me. I knew distraction was stealing my focus. I knew discipline mattered, and yet my behavior still kept returning to old patterns that confused me for a long time. Because if awareness alone changed people, I would have transformed years earlier. But the real problem was deeper. My brain was still emotionally trained to repeat old patterns automatically. That was the first time I truly understood this. Your brain believes what you repeatedly practice, not what you occasionally feel inspired by. Practice repetition, consistency. That realization completely changed the way I approached mindset transformation. Because suddenly, success was no longer about chasing emotional highs, it became about training, quiet mental training. Daily repetition, small patterns repeated until they become natural. That's how I slowly started to rewire my brain for success. Not dramatically, quietly. At first, I underestimated how powerful repetition really is, because most changes feel invisible while they are happening. You repeat a thought once, nothing changes. You repeat a habit for a few days, nothing dramatic happens. But eventually your mind starts adapting to what you repeatedly rehearse. That's true for negative patterns too. Overthinking is repetition. Self-doubt is repetition. Avoidance is repetition. Fear becomes stronger when practiced repeatedly. I had practiced hesitation for years, practiced insecurity for years, practiced expecting failure before effort even began. No wonder those patterns felt automatic. My brain had rehearsed them thousands of times. That realization was strangely empowering, because if repeated thoughts create limiting patterns, repeated intentional thoughts can create empowering ones too. Not fake positivity, not pretending life is easy, intentional mental direction. That became one of the most important success habits I ever built. Every morning, I began rehearsing one simple thought intentionally. I can do hard things calmly. That sentence became an anchor for me, especially during difficult moments. When fear appeared, I repeated it. When overwhelm appeared, I repeated it. When my mind predicted failure, I repeated it again. Not because one sentence magically changes your life, but because repetition changes emotional conditioning over time. That's how mindset shifts actually happen for most people. Not instantly, gradually, through repeated emotional experiences. And honestly, at first part of me felt ridiculous doing this, because my old mindset wanted dramatic transformation immediately. But the deeper I went into personal growth, the more I realized something important. The brain learns through repetition, whether the repetition is positive or negative. That means every day. You are already training your mind. The only question is, what are you training it to believe? That question changed the way I lived. Because suddenly, I noticed how often I rehearsed negativity automatically. I would imagine failure repeatedly, replay embarrassing moments repeatedly, predict bad outcomes repeatedly, speak to myself harshly repeatedly. And without realizing it, I was strengthening fear through constant mental rehearsal. That's why many people remain trapped in the same emotional cycles. Not because they are weak, because repetition creates familiarity, and familiarity creates automatic behavior. That realization gave me patience, because I stopped expecting instant mindset transformation. Instead, I focused on repetition, small repeated actions, Small repeated thoughts, small repeated behaviors aligned with the person I wanted to become. That's how discipline started feeling more natural. That's how focus improved. That's how confidence slowly became more stable. Not through one motivational moment, through accumulated repetition. I began noticing changes in subtle ways first. I reacted more calmly under pressure. I recovered faster after setbacks. I stopped spiraling emotionally as often. I became less controlled by temporary moods. Those changes mattered deeply to me because for years, my emotions controlled my decisions. If I felt insecure, I avoided action. If I felt unmotivated, I stopped trying. If I felt overwhelmed, I escaped into distraction. But repeated mental training started changing my emotional patterns slowly. That's the hidden power of mindset motivation when it becomes practice instead of entertainment. Because motivation alone fades quickly, training lasts longer, and maybe this is where many people struggle. They consume mindset content, but never rehearse new mental patterns consistently enough for real change to occur. Information alone rarely transforms identity. Repetition does. That became one of the biggest breakthroughs in my self-development journey. I stopped chasing endless new advice. I started mastering a few principles deeply through repetition. Calm action, self-awareness, intentional thoughts, consistent habits, emotional resilience repeated daily. That's how I slowly began rewiring my mind. And over time, something surprising happened. The thoughts that once controlled me started losing authority. Fear still appeared. Self-doubt still appeared, but they no longer sounded absolute. That changed everything. Because mindset mastery is not eliminating negative thoughts completely. It's refusing to let them lead your life automatically. That distinction freed me. And the deeper I went into this process, the more I realized something unexpected. Discipline had nothing to do with becoming harsh toward myself. In fact, the discipline that changed my life looked completely different than what I imagined. Chapter 5. The discipline nobody talks about. For most of my life, I misunderstood discipline completely. I thought discipline meant forcing yourself to suffer, waking up miserable, pushing through exhaustion, being emotionally hard all the time. That's what most mindset motivation content made it sound like. Like successful people were constantly at war with themselves, so every time I failed to maintain extreme routines, I assumed something was wrong with me. I thought, maybe I'm just not strong enough. But eventually, I realized something important. The discipline that changes your life is usually quiet, not aggressive, not performative, quiet. And honestly, that realization healed something inside me. Because for years, I approached personal growth through shame. Every mistake became self-criticism. Every unproductive day became proof that I was failing. Every setback became emotional punishment. I believed harshness would make me stronger, but it mostly made me exhausted. That was the real problem. I wasn't building discipline, I was building self-rejection. And eventually, self-rejection always leads to burnout. I remember one night after another failed attempt at creating the perfect routine, I had overloaded my schedule again. Too many goals, too many habits, too much pressure. And by the end of the week, I collapsed back into old patterns completely. Distraction, avoidance, guilt. I sat there frustrated with myself again and suddenly realized something painful. I treated myself like a machine instead of a human being. No patience, no understanding, no emotional awareness. Just pressure, constant pressure. That's when my entire perspective on discipline started changing. Because slowly, I began understanding that discipline is not punishment. Discipline is self-respect repeated. That sentence changed my life. Because suddenly, discipline stopped feeling like something violent. It became something protective. A way of caring for my future self. A way of supporting my goals instead of sabotaging them emotionally. That shift transformed everything. Because when discipline comes from self-hatred, you eventually rebel against yourself. But when discipline comes from self-respect, consistency becomes sustainable. That's what I had been missing for years. Sustainability. I could always force myself temporarily. Anyone can. But temporary intensity is not mindset mastery. Long-term consistency is, and consistency requires emotional stability, not emotional warfare. That realization completely changed the way I built success habits. I stopped creating impossible routines. Stopped trying to change my entire life overnight. Instead, I focused on one daily non-negotiable habit. Just one. No matter how I felt emotionally, I completed it. Sometimes it was simple. Writing for 20 minutes, going for a walk, reading a few pages. cleaning my workspace. The habit itself mattered less than the consistency, because every completed action reinforced something deeper. I do not abandon myself anymore. That became the foundation of real discipline for me. Not perfection, self-trust. And honestly, this process became emotional in ways I didn't expect, because for years, I only felt proud of myself during extreme motivation. But now, I started respecting myself for quiet consistency instead. That changes your internal world deeply, because confidence built through repetition feels different than confidence built through emotion. It feels calmer, more stable, more real, and maybe you've experienced this too. You start a new routine feeling inspired, then eventually lose momentum and blame yourself completely. But the real issue is often not laziness. It's unsustainable pressure. Most people try to build discipline through emotional intensity, but emotional intensity fades. Identity lasts longer. That's why small, consistent actions matter so much, because they slowly shape who you believe you are. I noticed that happening inside me gradually. I became more reliable, more emotionally stable, more focused. Not because life became easier, but because I stopped relying on motivation to determine my behavior. That's a huge mindset shift. I stopped asking, do I feel like doing this? And started asking, what would the person I'm becoming do next? That question guided me through difficult days, because future-focused thinking creates stronger decisions than emotion-focused thinking. And over time, discipline stopped feeling heavy. It started feeling grounded, like structure was finally giving my mind peace instead of pressure. That surprised me, because I always thought freedom meant doing whatever I felt like doing, but real freedom came from self-control, from knowing my emotions no longer controlled every decision. That's when I understood something powerful about success mindset. People who master their mindset are not emotionless. They simply stop allowing temporary emotions to permanently shape their future. That's a completely different way of living, and slowly, I could feel my life changing because of it. Not loudly, quietly, but even after building discipline. One thing still controlled more of my decisions than I wanted to admit: fear. And the hardest part was realizing how often fear had disguised itself as logic inside my mind. Chapter 6. How to Stop Letting Fear Make Decisions. For a long time, I thought fear was obvious. I thought fear looked dramatic. Panic, nervousness, visible hesitation. But eventually I realized the most dangerous fear is usually quiet, logical, reasonable, almost intelligent sounding. That's why I obeyed it for so many years without realizing it. Fear rarely said, "Don't grow." Instead, it whispered things like, "Wait until you're more prepared. Maybe now isn't the right time. What if you embarrass yourself? What if you fail again? What if you're not ready yet?" Those thoughts felt responsible, careful, wise, but the real problem was deeper. Most of the time, fear was not protecting my future. It was protecting my comfort, and comfort was quietly keeping my life small. That realization hit me hard, because suddenly I could see how many decisions fear had already made for me. The opportunities I delayed, the conversations I avoided, the goals I never fully committed to. The versions of myself I never became because fear convinced me to stay emotionally safe. That's painful to admit, especially when you realize how much potential gets lost through hesitation alone. I remember one specific moment that changed the way I viewed fear forever. I had an opportunity in front of me, something meaningful, something aligned with the person I wanted to become, and instead of taking action immediately, my mind began creating excuses. More preparation, more planning, more waiting. At first it sounded logical. But then I asked myself one uncomfortable question. If I felt fully confident, would I still delay this? The answer was no. That's when I realized something powerful. I was not waiting for the perfect strategy. I was waiting to feel emotionally safe, and emotional safety can quietly destroy growth if you obey it too often. Because confidence usually does not arrive before action. It arrives after repeated action. That changed everything for me, because for years, I thought successful people acted because they felt fearless. But most disciplined people still feel uncertainty. They simply stop asking fear for permission before moving forward. That's a completely different mindset. And honestly, learning this changed my entire approach to personal development. I stopped trying to eliminate fear completely. Instead, I started practicing movement while fear was present. That became one of the most important success habits I ever built. Every day, I force myself to take one small uncomfortable action, not huge risks, not dramatic life changes, small discomfort. Send the message, start the task, speak honestly, post the work, make the call, begin before confidence arrives. That habit slowly rewired my relationship with fear, because every time I survived discomfort, my brain learned something new. Fear is not always danger. Sometimes fear is simply growth before familiarity. That realization gave me freedom. Because before this, fear controlled my decisions constantly. I avoided opportunities that could expose me to judgment, avoided situations where I might fail publicly, avoided actions that challenged my identity, and avoidance always creates temporary relief. That's why it becomes addictive, but temporary relief often creates long-term regret. I learned that the hard way. Because the pain of fear fades faster than the pain of wondering. What could my life have become if I trusted myself more? That question haunted me. And maybe you felt this too. You know what you should do, but hesitation keeps delaying action. You keep waiting for certainty, waiting for confidence, waiting for the perfect moment emotionally. But the perfect emotional moment rarely arrives. That's the trap. Fear convinces people they need certainty before movement, but certainty is usually built through movement itself. That's why action matters so much in mindset transformation. Action interrupts mental spirals. Action creates evidence. Action teaches the brain that growth is survivable. And slowly the things that once terrified me started losing power over my decisions. Not because fear disappeared, because I stopped obeying it automatically. That distinction changes lives, because mindset mastery is not becoming fearless. It's learning that fear does not deserve leadership over your future. That realization became deeply emotional for me, because for years, I let fear shape my identity quietly. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of not being enough, fear of falling behind. Fear of being seen trying and failing anyway. But eventually, I became more afraid of staying the same than trying something uncomfortable. That's when growth accelerated, because once your desire for change becomes stronger than your attachment to emotional safety, your behavior starts shifting naturally. And over time, I noticed something surprising. Confidence stopped feeling like a personality trait. It started feeling like evidence. Evidence built through repeated moments where I acted despite fear. That's real confidence, not loud certainty, quiet self-trust. And once I understood that, I stopped waiting to feel fearless before taking action. I started moving forward while uncertainty was still present. That changed my life more than motivation ever did. But the biggest shift of all happened when I stopped obsessing over results completely and started focusing on becoming the kind of person who naturally creates them. Chapter 7. The success mindset shift that changed everything. For years, I measured my worth through results. If I succeeded, I felt valuable. If I failed, I felt behind. If I made progress, I felt hopeful. If I lost momentum, I felt disappointed in myself again. My emotional state changed constantly depending on outcomes, and honestly, that way of living is exhausting. Because results are unpredictable, sometimes you can work hard and still feel invisible for a while. You can improve quietly without immediate rewards. You can make real progress internally while your external life still looks unchanged. I did not understand that at first, so every time results came slowly, I lost motivation. Every setback felt personal. Every delay felt like proof that I was failing. And without realizing it, I became emotionally addicted to outcomes. That addiction quietly controlled my mindset for years. Because when your happiness depends entirely on visible success, you constantly feel unstable. That was my reality. I would start new habits feeling inspired. Track progress obsessively, look for signs that my life was finally changing. And if results did not appear fast enough, my old mindset returned immediately. What's the point? Maybe this isn't working. Maybe you're still the same person. Those thoughts drained my focus constantly, because deep down I believed results were the only proof of growth. But eventually something shifted, not dramatically, quietly. I remember one specific morning, after weeks of consistent effort, I had been waking up earlier, protecting my attention, working consistently, building better habits. But externally, my life still looked mostly the same. And part of me felt frustrated again. Then a strange thought entered my mind. What if the real progress is becoming the kind of person who keeps showing up? That question changed everything. Because suddenly, I stopped measuring growth only through external outcomes. I started measuring identity, process, consistency. Character, that became one of the biggest mindset shifts of my life. Success is not built only through results, it's built through becoming the person capable of creating results repeatedly. That distinction changes the entire emotional experience of personal growth. Because now, even before major success appears externally, you can still recognize transformation happening internally. Your focus improves, your discipline improves, your emotional stability improves, your self-control improves, your mindset becomes calmer. Those changes matter deeply, and honestly, this shift gave me peace. Because for years, I was emotionally chasing achievement instead of building identity. I wanted visible proof that I was changing. But real growth often happens invisibly first, quietly. That's why so many people quit too early. They expect transformation to feel dramatic immediately. But often, the biggest changes are internal long before they become external. I started seeing this clearly in my own life. My routines became more stable, my reactions became calmer. I stopped spiraling emotionally after small failures. I recovered faster after difficult days. Those shifts were not flashy, but they were life-changing. Because mindset transformation begins internally before life reflects it externally. That realization completely changed the way I approach success habits. I stopped obsessing over outcomes every day. Instead, I focused on process, effort, repetition, showing up consistently. That became my new definition of success. Not did everything go perfectly today, but did I behave like the person I want to become? That question guided my life differently. Because process-focused thinking creates long-term stability, outcome obsession creates emotional chaos. I know because I lived inside that chaos for years, always needing immediate proof, immediate progress, immediate validation. But personal development becomes much healthier when your identity no longer depends on constant external success. That's when confidence starts becoming more stable. Not because life is perfect, because your self-worth stops collapsing every time results move slowly. And maybe you've experienced this too. You work hard for a few days, then become discouraged because visible success has not appeared yet. But the truth is, your brain is changing long before your circumstances fully do. Your habits are changing, your emotional patterns are changing, your standards are changing. That matters more than most people realize, because once identity changes, results eventually follow. That's how sustainable self-development actually works. Quiet internal transformation, creating long-term external change. And I stopped asking, how quickly can I succeed? I started asking, how do I become someone who naturally creates success through consistency? That question changed my entire success mindset, because success stopped feeling like something I was chasing desperately. It started feeling like something I was slowly becoming aligned with. And honestly, that shift made me calmer than any motivational speech ever could. Because for the first time, I was no longer trying to force success emotionally. I was building the habits, focus, and mindset capable of sustaining it, quietly. But even after this breakthrough, there was still one pattern that continued trying to pull me backward. Self-sabotage, and the hardest part was realizing that self-sabotage often looks like protection while it's quietly destroying your future. Chapter 8. Breaking the pattern of self-sabotage. For a long time, I thought self-sabotage meant I didn't care enough about my future. That's what it felt like. Because how else do you explain wanting success while constantly doing things that move you away from it? Why would someone dream about growth, then procrastinate the work that could create it? Why would someone crave confidence, then repeatedly feed the habits destroying it? That contradiction confused me for years. And honestly, it made me angry at myself, because deep down, I knew I was capable of more. But somehow, I kept getting in my own way. That's the painful part about self-sabotage. You are both the person trying to build a better life and the person quietly pulling yourself backward at the same time. That internal conflict is exhausting. I lived inside it for years. I would start strong, feel inspired, create plans, build routines, then suddenly I would disappear from my own goals again. Distraction, overthinking, avoidance, excuses, and eventually, another cycle of guilt. I thought the problem was laziness, but the real problem was deeper. Self-sabotage is often emotional protection disguised as bad habits. That realization changed everything for me, because suddenly, my patterns started making sense. I procrastinated when tasks felt emotionally overwhelming. I distracted myself when fear became uncomfortable. I quit early when progress exposed me to possible failure. I compared myself to others when I felt insecure about my own direction. Those behaviors were not random, they were emotional escape routes. That's why self-sabotage is so dangerous. It temporarily protects you from discomfort while quietly damaging your future. And the worst part is, the relief feels real in the moment. Scrolling feels easier than focusing. Avoidance feels safer than risking failure. Quitting feels more comfortable than facing uncertainty. That temporary comfort becomes addictive. I know, because I lived there for years. Every time life became emotionally difficult, my brain searched for escape immediately. Phone, entertainment, overthinking, sleep, anything except facing discomfort directly. And eventually, avoidance became automatic. That was the first time I understood something powerful. Most self-sabotage is not caused by lack of ambition. It is caused by discomfort intolerance. People are not always avoiding work. Sometimes they are avoiding the emotions connected to the work. Fear, pressure, judgment, uncertainty. That realization gave me compassion for myself. Not excuses, compassion. Because for years I treated myself like a failure for struggling internally, but awareness changes everything. Once I understood the emotional roots underneath my habits, I could finally start interrupting them intentionally. That became one of the most important exercises in my mindset transformation journey. Whenever I wanted to procrastinate, escape, or quit, I paused and asked myself, what discomfort am I trying to avoid right now? That question slowed everything down, because suddenly my behavior became visible. I could see the emotional pattern underneath the action. Sometimes I was avoiding fear of failure. Sometimes I was avoiding boredom. Sometimes I was avoiding uncertainty. Sometimes I simply felt mentally overwhelmed, but once I named the discomfort, it stopped controlling me as automatically. That's the hidden power of awareness. It interrupts unconscious patterns, and unconscious patterns control most people's lives. I know they controlled mine. But slowly, I stopped treating discomfort like danger. That changed my relationship with growth completely. Because growth always contains discomfort. Focus is uncomfortable sometimes. Discipline is uncomfortable sometimes. Personal development requires emotional stretching. That's normal. But for years, I interpreted discomfort as a sign to stop. Now I started seeing discomfort differently, not as proof that something was wrong, but often as proof that change was happening. That shift helped me break patterns I had repeated for years. Not instantly, gradually. One interrupted reaction at a time, one conscious decision at a time, one moment where I chose awareness instead of autopilot. And honestly, that process felt emotional, because I started realizing how many years I had spent running from difficult emotions instead of learning how to move through them calmly. That's what mindset mastery really started becoming for me. Not controlling every thought perfectly, not becoming emotionless, learning how to stay present without immediately escaping discomfort. That's real emotional strength, and maybe this feels familiar to you too. Maybe you procrastinate most when something actually matters deeply. Maybe you overthink because uncertainty feels uncomfortable. Maybe you compare yourself because your own direction feels unclear. Maybe you keep restarting because consistency forces you to confront yourself honestly. You are not broken. Your mind simply learned patterns designed to protect you emotionally. But protection is dangerous when it keeps you disconnected from your future. That realization changed my entire success mindset, because I stopped asking, how do I avoid discomfort? I started asking, how do I become stronger than the discomfort trying to control my choices? That question changed me, because slowly I stopped needing perfect emotional conditions to move forward. I could feel fear and still act, feel uncertainty and still continue, feel resistance and still focus. That's when self-control started becoming real. Not controlling emotions, controlling decisions despite emotions. And over time, the patterns that once controlled my life started weakening. Not because I became perfect, because awareness became stronger than autopilot. That's how self-sabotage finally started losing power over me. Quietly. But the next shift changed my life even more deeply, because eventually I stopped making decisions based on who I used to be and started thinking like the person I wanted to become. Chapter 9. Think like your future self. For most of my life, I made decisions based on how I felt in the moment. If I felt motivated, I worked. If I felt tired, I delayed things. If I felt uncertain, I avoided action completely. My emotions controlled my direction constantly, and honestly, living that way kept my life emotionally unstable, because feelings change quickly. One difficult day could destroy momentum. One setback could collapse my confidence. One bad mood could pull me back into old habits again. That's exhausting, especially when you know you want more from life. I remember waking up one morning feeling frustrated with myself again, not because something terrible had happened, because I could feel time passing. Another week gone, another month moving quickly, another cycle of overthinking without enough action, and suddenly a painful thought entered my mind. If I keep making decisions like this, where will my life actually end up? That question stayed with me, because for years I focused mostly on immediate comfort, immediate relief, immediate emotional escape, but I rarely thought deeply about trajectory, direction, the future version of myself I was slowly becoming through repeated choices. That realization changed the way I viewed every habit, because suddenly, small decisions stopped feeling small. Every action became a vote for a future identity. Every repeated behavior became direction. That's when I started practicing something that transformed my mindset completely: future self-thinking. Simple, but powerful. Every morning before making decisions, I ask myself one question: what decision would my future self thank me for today? That question changed my life quietly because it interrupted emotional impulsiveness. Instead of reacting automatically, I paused. And slowly my decision started changing. My future self would thank me for protecting my focus. My future self would thank me for exercising even when motivation was low. My future self would thank me for resting intentionally instead of endlessly escaping through distraction. My future self would thank me for finishing difficult work instead of postponing it again. That mindset created clarity, because for years I made decisions based on temporary emotion. Now I started making decisions based on long-term identity. That's a completely different way of living. And honestly, it made me calmer, because future self-thinking reduces emotional chaos. You stop asking, what feels easiest right now, and start asking, what creates the best direction long-term? That shift changes everything, especially for people trapped in cycles of self-sabotage, because most destructive habits offer immediate comfort while quietly damaging the future. Discipline works differently. Discipline often feels uncomfortable in the moment, but peaceful in the long term. I finally understood that deeply, and the more I practiced future self-thinking, the more emotionally connected I became to my own potential. That matters because many people treat their future self like a stranger. They sacrifice their future peace for present comfort constantly. I used to do that too. Stay up too late, avoid important work, ignore my health, waste hours distracted, then wonder why my future felt overwhelming. But eventually, I realized something powerful. Your future self is not someone you magically become one day. Your future self is someone your current habits are creating right now. That realization changed my entire success mindset, because suddenly, every repeated choice mattered more. Every focused hour mattered. Every moment of discipline mattered. Every decision to continue despite discomfort mattered. That awareness made me more intentional. Not perfect, intentional. And maybe you felt this too. You imagine a calmer, stronger, more disciplined version of yourself, but emotionally that version still feels distant, unreal, almost imaginary. I understand that feeling deeply, but one thing changed everything for me. I stopped viewing my future self as fantasy. I started treating that version of me like responsibility. That mindset shift creates action. Because when your future matters emotionally, your present behavior changes naturally. You begin protecting your focus more carefully. You become more intentional with your time. You stop abandoning yourself so casually, and slowly your life starts aligning differently. That's what happened to me, not through one dramatic breakthrough. Quiet, repeated decisions aligned with the person I wanted to become. Over time, those decisions became identity, and identity became lifestyle. That's how real mindset transformation happens. Quietly, one decision repeated long enough to become character. I noticed it in simple moments first. I became less reactive emotionally, more patient, more focused, more stable. I stopped feeling controlled by every temporary That's one of the greatest forms of freedom, not freedom from difficulty, freedom from emotional impulsiveness. Because once you stop letting temporary emotions lead permanent decisions, your life changes direction. And eventually I realized something beautiful. The future I wanted was not created through giant life changes. It was created through ordinary choices repeated consistently. Quiet focus, quiet discipline, quiet self-respect. That's how people truly master their mindset, not by controlling every thought perfectly, but by repeatedly choosing thoughts, actions, and habits aligned with the life they want to build. And after years of struggling internally, I finally understood the lesson that brought everything together. Mastering your mindset is not about becoming someone else. It's about finally becoming someone your future can trust. Chapter 10. Master your mindset. Change your life. For a long time, I thought mastering your mindset meant controlling every thought perfectly. Never doubting yourself, never feeling fear, never overthinking again. But after everything I went through, all the struggle, all the inconsistency, all the internal battles, I realized something much more human. Mindset mastery is not perfection. It's direction. It's learning which thoughts deserve leadership over your life and which thoughts no longer get to decide your future. That realization changed everything for me, because for years I treated every negative thought like truth. Every fear felt permanent. Every moment of self-doubt felt like identity. If my mind said you're probably going to fail, I believed it emotionally. If my mind said you're too far behind, I carried that weight into my day. If my mind said you'll never really change, I obeyed that thought without realizing it. That's the dangerous part about mindset. The thoughts you repeat long enough eventually become the lens through which you experience your entire life. And if you never question those thoughts, they quietly control your future. Mine did for years. I looked calm on the outside sometimes, but internally, my mind felt crowded. Fear, comparison, pressure, overthinking, constant mental noise, and honestly, that noise exhausted me more than work ever did, because fighting yourself every day is exhausting. Wanting success while secretly doubting your ability to sustain it. Wanting personal growth while emotionally identifying with old limitations. Wanting confidence while rehearsing insecurity internally. That internal conflict drains people slowly. I know because it drained me for years, but somewhere along this journey something changed. Not dramatically, quietly. I stopped trying to become perfect and started training my mind differently instead. That shift brought peace back into my life, because eventually I understood something powerful. You do not need a perfect mind to build a better life. You need a trained mind, a patient mind, a mind that no longer turns every fear into a command. That distinction changes everything. Because now, negative thoughts could still appear without controlling my identity. Fear could still appear without controlling my decisions. Self-doubt could still appear without stopping my growth. That's real mindset transformation, not eliminating difficult thoughts. Learning how to lead yourself despite them. And honestly, that made me calmer than any motivational speech ever could. Because motivation fades, emotions fluctuate, life becomes difficult sometimes. But mindset training creates stability. That's what finally changed my life. Not intensity, not endless inspiration, stability. I became more disciplined because I stopped waiting to feel perfect before acting. I became more focused because I stopped feeding every distraction immediately. I became more confident because I kept promises to myself consistently. I became emotionally stronger because I stopped escaping discomfort automatically. Quiet habits, quiet repetition, quiet self-respect. That's what truly helped me master my mindset, and maybe the most surprising part of all. Success stopped feeling loud. It stopped feeling like chasing something constantly. Instead, it started feeling aligned, peaceful, intentional, because once your thoughts stop fighting your future, your energy changes completely. You stop wasting so much emotional energy doubting yourself. You stop rebuilding old versions of yourself constantly. You stop letting fear quietly shape your identity. That freedom is life-changing. And maybe you felt this too. That deep exhaustion from constantly overthinking your life, constantly restarting, constantly trying to become someone new overnight. I understand that feeling deeply, but real transformation rarely happens through dramatic reinvention. It happens through repeated internal shifts, one thought challenged, one habit repeated, one fear faced calmly, one decision aligned with your future self. That's how your life changes, quietly. And over time, you begin noticing something beautiful. You react differently, think differently, recover differently, carry yourself differently, not because you became someone fake, because you stopped letting old mental patterns control your behavior automatically. That's true self-control, not controlling life perfectly, controlling what leads your decisions. And if there's one thing I hope you carry with you after listening to this full audiobook, it's this. Your thoughts are powerful, but they are not destiny. Your past mindset shaped part of your life, but it does not have to shape the rest of it. You can rewire your brain through repetition. You can build a stronger success mindset. You can develop focus, discipline, emotional resilience, personal growth, not instantly, but intentionally. And maybe the life you've been waiting for does not begin with louder motivation. Maybe it begins in silence, the moment you decide, my old thoughts no longer get to choose my future. If this audiobook connected with you, take a moment to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss future mindset transformation audiobooks focused on personal development, discipline, growth mindset, self-development, emotional healing focus, and success habits designed to help you rebuild your life from the inside out. And remember this, master your mindset and eventually you change your entire life. And maybe tonight you stop fighting yourself for a moment. Maybe tonight you stop treating your mind like an enemy that needs to be defeated. Because for years, that's what I did. Every negative thought became a battle. Every bad habit became proof that I was failing. Every difficult emotion became something I tried to escape immediately. But eventually, I realized something important. A peaceful mind is not built through self-hatred, it's built through self-awareness, through patience, through repeated moments where you choose growth instead of emotional autopilot. That's what mindset mastery really became for me. Not controlling every thought perfectly, but becoming conscious enough to choose which thoughts deserve action. That distinction changed my life quietly. Because before this journey, my thoughts controlled my direction automatically. Fear made decisions, doubt made decisions, comfort made decisions. Old identity made decisions, and without realizing it, I kept rebuilding the same life emotionally. Maybe you know this feeling too. You genuinely want change, but your habits keep recreating the same patterns. Your mind keeps replaying the same fears. Your emotions keep pulling you backward into old versions of yourself. That cycle is exhausting. But cycles can be interrupted. That's the beautiful part. Not instantly, not perfectly, but intentionally. One repeated decision at a time, one moment of awareness at a time, one small act of discipline at a time. That's how you rewire your brain for success. Quietly, and if you take anything from this audiobook, let it be this: your mind learns from repetition. If you repeatedly practice fear, fear becomes automatic. If you repeatedly practice avoidance, avoidance becomes identity. But if you repeatedly practice self-respect, focus, discipline, emotional resilience, those patterns become identity too. That realization gave me hope again, because suddenly change stopped feeling impossible. It started feeling trainable. And honestly, that perspective changed everything about my personal development journey. I stopped asking, how do I completely transform overnight? I started asking, what am I teaching my mind every day? That question creates awareness, because every habit teaches your brain something. Every repeated thought teaches your brain something. Every emotional reaction teaches your brain something. Your life follows those patterns quietly. That's why mindset matters so much. Not because positive thinking magically fixes life, because the way you think shapes the way you act. And the way you act shapes the life you eventually live. That's real mindset transformation, not fantasy, practice. And maybe right now, you still feel behind, still feel inconsistent, still feel frustrated with yourself sometimes. That's okay. Growth does not require perfection. It requires honesty, patience, repetition, and the willingness to stop letting your old mindset speak for your future. Because your future deserves better thoughts, better habits, better emotional patterns, and most importantly, a better relationship with yourself. That relationship changes everything. Because once you stop abandoning yourself emotionally, discipline becomes easier, focus becomes easier, confidence becomes more stable. Not because life becomes perfect, because your mind finally stops working against you constantly. That's the peace I spent years searching for. And strangely enough, it did not arrive through louder motivation. It arrived quietly, the moment I stopped believing every fearful thought automatically. The moment I stopped identifying with my worst habits. The moment I stopped treating my past like permanent identity. The moment I realized I could become someone new through repeated intentional choices. That's when my life truly started changing. And maybe yours can too. Quietly, one thought at a time, one habit at a time, one decision at a time, because the mind that once kept you stuck can also become the mind that finally sets you free.